Hi guys, welcome to Pixel Affair. It's Kobe here. So in today's video, we are going to see how we will do this in Cinema 4D. So as you can see, we have these sphere or bubbles like rotating around each other, and you can see some of the bubbles have like spheres inside it as well, and it's all reacting and colliding with each other. So let's see how we do this in Cinema 4D. And this was inspired by a Houdini video I saw by Danial Ghods. I'll leave the link in the description. And I decided to see how I'll do that in Cinema 4D. So if I had this, you can see this is the main project file. And if I hit play, you can see this is the Cinema 4D scene file for the original video. So let's actually start a whole new project and see how we do this from scratch. So I have a new scene open here in Cinema 4D, and I'm using Cinema 4D 2023.2. So let's go ahead and set up our scene. So first of all, I don't like the work plane, so I come into my filter and I uncheck work plane so that it will be plain like that. Now let's go ahead and create our first object, and I'll come into my object. I'll create a cylinder, and then this rotation segment I'll set it to 3, right? Also, let's change the display from garage shading to garage shading with lines. And now let's come back into our attribute manager, go to the caps and uncheck the caps because you don't want any caps here. Now let's come back to the object tab. The rotation segment, let's set it to 10. Oh no, I mean no rotation segment, I mean the height segment, let's set it to 10. And I think we are cool. The next is we are going to create a deformer. So I'll come into my object and I'll create a spline wrap deformer, make it a child of the cylinder, and we want the spline wrap deformer to wrap around a circle. So I'll come into my object and I'll create a circle. I'll reduce the radius of the circle to maybe 80, and then in fact the cylinder, I'll reduce the radius to something like 35 as well. So now let's select the spline wrap. Where the spline is required, let's drag and drop our circle in here, and I can see something is happening, but it's not wrapping around properly. That's because in the spline wrap, let's change the axis to +y so that it now wraps around well properly. So in the spline wrap, down in the attributes, you can see we have rotation in here. It's closed, but you can open it. And in the rotation, you can actually select one of these points and move it, and you can see it's rotating it from down to up, like, you know. So what you do is now right click in there, the first rotation, the banking, right click in here and come to the spline preset and choose linear. And now you can see it gives us this linear rotation, right? And now also down here, you can see the spline rotation down here. Let's move this one up, all the way up. And now this is what we are going to use to control the rotation of our cylinder, on which we will clone our spheres. So now if I come down here to the spline rotations friend, and now you can see you can actually animate it. So let's go ahead and animate that. So let's set it to 0, and let's increase our number of frames. I'll increase my number of frames to maybe 250, right? And now let's add frame, let's see at frame 40, let's set a keyframe, which with the spline rotation in the spline wrap, let's set a keyframe here, and at frame maybe 200, maybe that frame 200. Let's also set our spline rotation to all the way. We can go more than 100%, so let's set it to like 300 and set a keyframe. So now if we hit play, you can see everything is moving. If you want, we can actually come into our timeline and make it a linear. So we can select our spline, right, and change the move from spline to curve to linear, so that it moves linearly. So that's basically the animation, which is going to drive our spheres or our bubbles. So let's go ahead and create the spheres as well. So I'll come into my object cloner. I'll create a cloner object, and the next thing we are going to create is the sphere. So I'll come into here and I'll create a sphere, make it a child of the cloner. Let's select the cloner and change the mode from grid to object, and the object we want to clone on is the cylinder. So let's drag and drop the cylinder in here. You can see it's cloning on the cylinder, but the spheres are too big. So let's reduce the radius of the spheres to maybe, let's see, 15 for now. And it's cloning randomly on the surface of our cylinder. So let's select the cloner and come to the distribution. Let's change it from surface to polygon center, and you can see in the polygon center, every polygon center has one sphere. So now let's go ahead and hide our cylinder. We don't want to see it. And if we hit play, well, actually, let's see why it's not. Well, I don't think we set the keyframes for the spline rotation. Oh, okay, at frame 0, it works, everything. It's fine. So let's hide our cylinder. And if you hit play, get to at frame 40, you see it starts animating, it starts moving. And this is exactly what we want. Another thing is that we don't want the distribution of the segment of the sphere. So let's select the sphere and change the type from standard to icosahedron. So it gives us fairly distributed segments on the spheres. So now everything is fine. The next is we are going to add our cloth simulation to it. And it's as simple as just right clicking on our clonal object simulation, and let's go add a cloth tag to our clonal object. So with the cloth tag added, if I hit play, you can see our spheres will all fall down, and that's because there's gravity in the scene. So if I type Ctrl D and come into my project settings, you can see you come to the simulation tab, and down here you have the scene tab here. Let's make sure gravity is set to 0. And now let's go back into our object, and if I hit play, you can see it's not falling, but then it's still moving away from each other, and some of the spheres are actually intersecting, right? So what we want to do is we don't want it to intersect in the initial stage. So I'll select the sphere and reduce it from maybe the radius to maybe 12. Let's see, right? And you can see it doesn't intersect in the initial stage, right? So everything stays where it is. Now the next thing is we want it to inflate so that it all collides, like we saw in the initial video. So I'll select the cloth tag, simply come to the balloon tab, and let's check on the balloon, and let's increase the overpressure to something like maybe 12 and see what happens. So if we hit play, you should start seeing our balloon expand, right? And it's trying to expand, but you can see it's not getting as big. So another thing we can do is let's actually come to the surface tab here, and let's increase the stretchiness to maybe, let's see, 100, and the bendiness as well to 100, and let's see if we get something. So if I hit play, you can see now it's actually stretching, and that's what you want. But now that it's stretching, you can see it's also pushing them away, but we want it to stay and recognize the animation. You can see it's not following the animation as well, right? So all we have to do is to simply come down here to the mix animation tab, and now in here you can see with force. Let's check with force, and let's set that one to like maybe 2, and let's hit play once again to see what you get. You can see now it's all growing, and now it's bending and following the animation, and you are getting somewhere, and it's colliding with each other as well. So that's basically the whole setup, and we are done with first part of it, which is the colliding of the spheres and rotating in that manner. Now one thing I think I'll check is, I think when I select the tag, the stretchiness I think is too much, so I'll actually reduce it to maybe something like 10 for now, and let's go ahead and hit play for now. So you can see I think the 10 is fine, and because like as usual when I'm actually recording the tutorial, I don't try to push the segments when it comes to simulation and stuff. So I'm keeping the segment with this one just 16, but in the original video I think I actually bumped it up to 36 or something, but let's keep it 16 in here so that it can be faster whilst recording and I can do the tutorial. So now I think the stretchiness is fine. If you think you can you don't like it, you can actually play with the bendiness, the stretchiness, and all of those things to get the kind of effect you want. And now the mix animation tool, the 2 is fine, so it's following the animation fairly okay, right? So that's basically it. So the next thing I'm going to do is to just basically bake this one as alembic, and then start the part where we simulate the spheres within the circles, the small particles within the spheres as well. So what I'll do is simply select this cloner, right click, and I'll say come down here to bake as alembic. You can actually, if you want it as one object, you can put this whole cloner in a connect object, right, so that you can bake as one object. But then I want individual spheres so that we can go ahead and put in different objects inside. So I'll right click and I'll choose bake as alembic down here. Where is it? Bake as alembic, and it'll ask us where we want to save. I'll go ahead and save it in my project. So it's going ahead to bake it as alembic, and after that we'll come back and continue the tutorial after it's done. So it's done with the alembic, and you can see we have another object created here. So let's go ahead and disable the cloner. All right, let's go ahead and disable this one so that we don't have any distraction. So this is just the alembic, and now you can scrub through and you can see everything plays smoothly, and that's what we want, right? Basically everything is playing fine, and that's exactly what you want. If like you are doing a whole, you can actually take time to get the simulation or the collision, everything the way you want it, but this one is to just show you how this whole process is done. So yeah, now that we have this, let's go ahead and see how you create those particles inside the spheres. And it's as simple as, so first of all, you can see at frame 0 all the way to frame 30, like that's where the whole thing inflates, and then from somewhere frame 40, like the whole animation starts, like, remember. So that's what we want. We want this whole thing to start from frame 0. We don't want to see the initial inflation of our spheres and all of that. So let's select the cloner, the alembic cloner for null. Select all of it. You can simply middle click on the main null object, and it will select all the child objects, every child under it, and then hold control to click on the null, and then it will deselect the null. So you can see we have every child under the null selected without the null itself. So that's a trick you can use to select object under a null quicker. So now that you've selected all the spheres, you can then come down here, and you can see we want it to start the whole thing at frame 0. We want it to start from frame 40. So let's come into the offset, and let's offset it to, actually let's offset it to minus 40, or even 40 minus 41. So you can see right at frame 0 with all our alembic selected, you can see it starts rotating from there, right? It doesn't inflate before everything starts. It just at frame 0 it starts rotating from there, and that's exactly what we want. So now let's go ahead and see, let's take one of them which we want to clone inside, or let's say 3 of them. So I want, let's say this one. Let's first of all make sure everything is fine. All right, and so I want, let's say this particular one, right, this sphere, and maybe I'll say this one. Let's choose this one as well, and maybe let's see this one, right? So these 3 are the ones I want to put some particles inside. So what I'll do is, you can see in the alembic, in the attribute object manager, we've selected those 3. Let's move it up so that we know, move all of them upwards. Yeah, so it started raining, so I had to pause the recording because the sound was coming in. So now let's continue. So like I was saying, you have to select those 3 objects that you want to put the particles in, right, and move it on top of the hierarchy so that you can actually see this is the 3 that you want to. It's not really necessary, but to differentiate it, it's important so that it makes it easier for you. So what I'm going to do is, these are the 3 I want to put the particles inside, right? And these are the first 3. I'll come into my object in here, and I'll create a connect object, drag and drop it into the null, alembic null, and let's select those 3 objects and make it a child of the connect object, right? So those 3, everything still works fine. Now let's come in here and create a cloner object, and in the cloner object I'll create another sphere. I'll make it the radius, like say maybe 2 or 3, right? and I'll make it a child of the clone object. I'll call this one particles, right? And in the cloner particles, I'll change the mode from grid to object, and the object you want to clone on is the connect object. So let's drag and drop in the connect object. Now let's select the connect object, make sure your world is unchecked, right? And that's important. And now let's go back to the particles. Let's select the mode, the surface, the distribution right now is set to surface. Let's set it to volume, right? And now let's actually select the connect objects and come to basic and say X-ray so that we see what's going on. Let's change the distribution, the display from garage shading lines to normal garage shading so that we can see. So you can see the spheres are being created in the volume of our connect object, and those are the 3 spheres, right? So let's select the particles again, come into the object tab, and you see the volume is set to random. Let's set it to surface, right? So that it stays consistent, so it doesn't pop. So now it's actually working. You see the spheres are staying on the surface of our volume. Now let's select the particles and let's increase it to, let's say, the count to down here, it's set to 20. Let's set it to, we can set it to like 300, which is fine, but it's on the surface, so we want it to be in the middle, right? So to do that, all we have to do is select the particles, right click it, actually not right click, let's come into our effectors now, add a plane effector. I can see it pushing it away. Let's select the plane effector, come to the perimeter, and I'll check the position Y. Rather, I'll move the position Z inwards, and you can see because it's on the surface of our object, it's when you move it to minus Z, like when you move the Z in the minus direction, you can see it moves our particles inwards, right? So now it's not on the surface. So this is exactly what we want. So you can see our particles in the middle, but it's not interacting like the way we want. So it's to do that, all we have to do is to right click on our particles clone object. In the bullet tag, let's add rigid body, and if we hit play, as usual, everything will explode, but we want it to stay within the spheres. So all we have to do is in the connect object, right click and add similar bullet tag collider body, and now let's hit play. You can see now it stays in there, right? And but still some are falling. So what you have to do is the collision. Let's actually hit Control D to come to the bullet tab here, the project setting in the bullet tab, and let's go to expect, and let's actually, is it expect general? I think here, expect, and let's increase the collision margin. I think the steps per frame to 25 so that it gives it a bit accurate calculation. So now if you increase it, you can see now it's not falling out, right? So the calculation is quite accurate, or it's improved. So now you can see now our particle stays just within our spheres, and everything rotates. And exactly that's how I did this whole thing. I hope you basically get the idea. So now the next part, which is, if let me actually bring the picture viewer to see. So you can see we have one with the blue particles, and we have one which has like some sort of bubbles within a sphere, and that one too is just the same thing that I did. I created another set of spheres that I wanted to, because I've not baked it, another spheres I want. So let's say, let me take this one for example to show it, but if you want multiple of them, you have to put it in a connect object so that you can use it. So with the same thing, let's say, let me actually choose, okay, this one is fine. I'll come in here and let's actually duplicate the particles cloner, and now I don't want that one to be dynamic, so I'll delete the dynamic tag, and also I'll make it smaller, maybe 1, right? And maybe the object you want to clone on is the one I selected. Where is it? You can choose either of them again. Let's say this one, right? And all I have to do is in the particles, this one, I'll actually change it from the connect. And let's look at, let me select this one. Let me move it up so that I can see what I'm working with. So I'll move it on top so that I can see. So now let's select the particle, and now let's drag and drop this one in here. So if we select this one as well and come to basic tab and check X-ray, you can see what's going on within it. So so with this one, I use different effector to affect the particle so that it looks so a bit different from this one as well. So that's basically how I created it, and I added a bit of randomness to it. So let me actually do that. Let's select the particles through that we've created, come to the effector, and let's delete the plain effector we have in. You can see it's now back on the surface of our sphere. So let's create another plain effector. Now let's put the Y to 0 in the Z. Let's reduce the Z a bit. Right, and we want to affect the scale randomly as well. So let's select it again and come to our effectors. Now add a random effector to it. We don't want to affect the position, but rather the scale. Maybe set the scale to uniform and set it to maybe 0.3 or 0.5. Right, and now I think the particles are plenty as well, so I can select it, come to the object tab and reduce it to like maybe 100. Right, and basically that's what I did. Maybe I can add a little bit of random rotation position to it, maybe. So basically that's how I did it. So you can see with this one also have the same particles, and this one there's no simulation, so it stays there. So that's basically how I did this whole setup. I hope you've learned something from this particular video. If you're interested in how I actually added the lighting and textures to it, let me know in the comment section, and I'll actually do a second version where I show how I added lights and textures to this whole scene using redshifts. Now, one last thing is, before you actually make sure you're about to render, before you render your simulation, one thing you have to do is to make sure you bake your dynamic object. So you can select the dynamic object and come to the down here, the attribute manager, and you can see we have cache. You can simply bake it, and now you can go ahead and render it so that you can scrub through. So that's what's one important thing. And also, after everything is done, you can see the edges of our spheres are not as smooth, so you can put it in a subdivision surface. So you can simply create a subdivision surface and put them in, and you can see it smoothens our scene objects. So that's basically how you do this stuff. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.